Hey gang, long time no see. So it's a kind of an update if you missed kind of the social section of YouTube where I'm starting to post things now. Just kind of ideas on shows that are upcoming and whatnot. So if that sounds interesting, pop over and read that. I think there's only 3 posts now. You might know some changes here. So this is maybe a little bit quieter, or my voice sounds a little bit differently. I got a whole new rig, something I've been meaning to do for a while. My old rig was about 6 years old, so if you see anything weirdness on this particular recording, let me know in the comments down below, like if I look orange or blue or green or whatever, if the sound is way too high or way too low, or there's cracks, there's pops, whatever. I'll listen to it in pre-recording, but I might not capture everything. So, or post-production. So let me know. Because having to reset all the filters in OBS is a little bit weird. So anyway, this is something that I talked about a little bit in my last show, something that I thought would be a little bit fun, a little bit of a distraction, especially while I'm setting up settings here and just trying to get this whole setup back up and running. I wanted to go through and do kind of my guesses on what'll be the features at CitCon. So this is just wild speculation, total guessing, and to be pretty blunt, this is both a combination of what I want to see and what I hope to see, and I'm going to kind of temper that with what I think we'll actually see. And I looked back over the last couple CitCons, which might not be the best indicator for this, and I'll get into that after the break. So stick around if that sounds interesting. So I had the brilliant idea that we just got the July monthly report, and I was saying to myself, you know, it would be really cool is if I looked back at the July reports for 2021 and 2022, compared it to what we saw at CitCon, and then saw if there's any correlations there. It turns out there's a couple, especially with the ships, because we don't typically get a lot of ship releases between July and IAE, which is the International Aerospace, or I guess the Interstellar Aerospace Expo. Yeah, IAE is November, CitCon is typically October. It'll be October this year. So October, November, we get a couple ships, but between July and there, we usually don't. So usually when they're talking about ships in these monthly reports, those are kind of hints of what's coming. Unfortunately, everything else, there wasn't a lot of hints that we could actually use. So it was a good idea. It just wasn't all there. I do think there are some clues in the monthly report of things that might come, but I think it kind of comes back to the actual roadmap and the deliverables view, which is of dubious use, but I think it does give us some context of things that might be coming. So let's go ahead and get into it. So while looking back at previous CitCons, there really wasn't a correlation between the monthly report, like I was saying, and what was actually shown. But the CitCon, this is just the Star Citizen wiki if people are curious, but the actual layout of the shows for CitCon is predictable. They tend to do the same kinds of things. So you can sort of see they have Life in the Verse, which I believe this was a Pyro one. Then they had Ship Talk, then they had Gen 12, then they had Crafting Worlds, Planetary Tech, Server Meshing, Sounds of Space, Systemic Gameplay, Stream of Thought, and then they had this closing of the keynote by Chris Roberts, both the opening and the closing. So when we look at 2022, you can see we got Planetary Pyro, Design Brief, New Underground, Need for Multiple Speeds, Lorville Redux, Power Play, and Talking Chips. So the correlation there between the two CitCons is that we get something that's gameplay. Typically the keynote is kind of a donut. A donut in that is when you have something starts here, there's kind of a break, there's something else, and then you finish the original thing. You just kind of loop it all around. So it kind of makes bookends at either side. And they typically do that. They didn't do that last year, but they did do that in 21, like this keynote start and finish by a CR. So they'll typically do something like that that kind of shows this is our best vision of what we think the game will be like soon. And again, I was talking about expectations. I think it was in my last vid where expectations for CIG is within 3 years, this is kind of how we think the game will be working. And usually about half the stuff from CitCon actually makes it in within the next year, but the other half takes a while. Like Pyro, for example, has now taken 3 or 4 years, but CIG expects it within 3 years. We typically, the consumers of this media, typically aim for about, we're thinking 3 to 6 months. We're like, this is going to be dropping by midtime next year. Look how far it is in this demo. And then we're always disappointed. And so temper your expectations. Most of the things that they will show at CitCon will be 2 to 3 years off. If it comes earlier, we'll get things earlier than that, but not the whole picture that they show us. But they'll usually have that donut. They'll kind of say, this is the gameplay we're expecting. I expect that on the first day. I would also expect an announcement on the first day, but I'll get to that in a minute. Life in the Verse is typically like their big locations. This time, I would kind of expect that to be Ruin Station. We've seen aspects of Ruin Station, but it's always been like concept art or gray box, or they're just kind of shaping things out. This is an idea of what we're thinking about for the lighting, but it's not the station. I could see them actually going through the station at this point and just showing off all the tech they've been building over the last really 3 years. One of my hopes, and I'll get into this now, is that, and CIG, if you're listening, don't show us pyro and don't show us quantum, like the full functioning economy. I know there are elements of quantum working in the game right now, like for fuel, but don't show us those two things unless you are pretty damn sure. Like Aaron is like, we're good for next year. It's okay. If that's not happening, if you're like 50-50, don't show us pyro and quantum, because I think the community is kind of hitting their limit on things that they could see that are coming in the future. So just bear that in mind. Ship talk, they always talk about ships. Obviously, this is CIG's revenue stream. So they are going to talk about ships. They are going to sell ships. That's coming. And we'll get into what ships I think are coming at the end of this, because I got to get you guys to watch this whole thing somehow. Gen 12, multi-core and Vulcan. They always talk about the engine in some... Actually, they didn't last year. That's kind of surprising. Okay, so that made a liar out of me, but 2020, they talked about the engine too. So they'll usually talk about something that will improve performance. Some sort of technical engineering aspect of the game that's heavily impact on the game. You'll never see it directly. You're not going to be loading up the background engine and looking at what it's doing, but they'll usually have one of those episodes or panels just to kind of knock out how the thing is working in the background and how they're going to make our lives better. So I would expect one of those panels on there. Crafting worlds, planetary tech, Star Citizen, just people are talking about how they're worried Star Citizen is going to get dated. When I walk around in Star Citizen and on the planets and look at the characters, games they're releasing right now, hang on. So this is one of the characters from Starfield, which is a game that's coming out at the end of the year. This, to me, doesn't look better than what's in Star Citizen. So this is an epic hero level NPC that we'll be interacting with. I don't think, and I say this as someone that's done 3D modeling in the past, that this is better than what Star Citizen was producing 5 years ago. It'll probably have better like voice acting because there's so few audio files that they can put in the game without bogging it down right now. But I think Star Citizen's characters are pretty safe for a while. You look at the stuff that's rolling out now, most of the games aren't focused on kind of this hyper realistic aspect of humanity and characters. They're certainly not focusing on eyeball wetness. So I think it's safe with the characters for probably the next 5 years, unless they actually start literally scanning people's faces down to like pore levels, which there's no reason to do that in a game. You start hitting the uncanny valley, which is when something gets so realistic that your brain starts saying, that's gross. You want an example of uncanny valley? Hang on. This is the uncanny valley. So this is the Polar Express, which got famously ripped for how creepy and unlifelike their characters were. This was a huge coup as far as technology went back in the day when this movie released. But it was one of those things people started watching and they're like, I don't like that. That's the uncanny valley. Is you have things like anime, which are so simplified that your brain fills in the notes and you can relate to something that's basically 3 triangles and you can be like, oh, that's a human face, and great, that you fill in the details and you're fine. You go too realistic and your brain starts saying, that's not a human. I don't like that. I don't know what that is, but that's not a human. That's the uncanny valley. And at a certain point, games hit that uncanny valley. Thankfully, Starfield doesn't look like it's done it, and CIG definitely hasn't done it. Their characters, I've never looked at them and been like, ooh. So that's good. Their worlds are also very good. I don't think anyone would ever argue that even now, after what, 6 or 7 years, when did Lorville drop? Whenever Lorville dropped, I have still not gotten tired of watching the sunrise. Occasionally I'll be landing at a bunker and the sun will be coming up or going down. I'll be like, that is really pretty. And other games don't have that. And kind of the whole reason that I support Star Citizen in the first place is because other games wouldn't see that as necessary. I would be shocked if we're getting sunsets and sunrises in Starfield just because it's not necessary to tell their story. CIG wanted to tell that story, and that's one of the reasons why I backed this game. But anyway, moving on. I think they will have something on planetary tech and what the next thing will be. And I guess it'll be water related. They've done a few things that are kind of water tech. Maybe lava. They talked a lot about lava before, and I'm sure they're going to try to tie in pyro. I know they want to release pyro next year. I just don't know if it'll happen if server meshing can't come along. Which, right down here, you have server meshing in the state of persistence. I wouldn't be surprised if we have another one of those. Again, my warning to CIG would be, unless you are positive it is dropping in next year, kind of skip over that and do a different GWiz tech thing. Sounds of Silence, they will usually do one that's more on the artsy side, so to balance off the engineering side, they'll have like concept arts or armors or characters. They had, I can't remember if it was an ISC or actually a CitCon where they talked to Jay Lee and they showed off all of the coming cybernetics. I wouldn't be surprised if we get something about cybernetics in the next level of med gameplay. But they always have something that's conceptual, like artistically conceptual, and I think we'll get one of those too. Systemic gameplay, this is a Tony Z one, and they almost always have either something with Tony Z or kind of the high concept, this is the overarching background, either economy or controls or life behind the game as a whole. And I would assume we're going to get something like that. Again, unless server meshing is coming along, we'll be able to see it on the screen, but you're not going to be able to see it in the game. Like once server meshing comes in, all of the gates will open and everything will be fine and probably be very broken. To rehash, I think they'll have something on the engine, like the background that's going to make our lives better. Probably something on server meshing would be my guess. Unless they're going to do, right now, if you look at the roadmap deliverables, they talk about Gen 12 V1. I wouldn't be surprised if they talk about what's coming in V2. Moving on from that, ships, again, I'll get to at the end because it's just kind of a good one to wrap up with. Locations. I think that they're going to talk about pyro stations. I wouldn't be shocked if there was a donut involving Ruin Station. Now that they've got it, it looks pretty good from some of the images we've seen. So if you haven't seen it yet, this is Ruin Station. And to give you an idea, I want to say there was a Javelin destroyer is probably about this big. Actually, probably about, Yeah, probably about the size of one of these gaps. They had a picture where a javelin was like flying down this, or flying right above this corridor. It might even be this thing down here. Uh, but Ruin Station is enormous. It's huge. And I am sure CIG has wanted to show this thing off. Now, if they will do a thing like we've seen excerpts from Ruin Station, we've kind of seen their white box, they've kind of shown off lighting a little bit, and examples and stuff like that, but they haven't actually walked us through Ruin Station. I would not be surprised if that was something they show us. Sort of tech and location wise, last year it was the new underground, which turned out to be one of the most interesting of the shows they had last year. I think what they're going to do, and this is based loosely on what they said at I think it was the Shanghai Bar Season, where there was a couple leaks, but apparently the devs were drunk. So take it with a big old grain of salt. But somebody said, hey, what's the deal with the Pioneer? When are we going to start seeing that? Will Rastar help us? And one of the devs said, oh, if you're looking forward to the Pioneer, definitely check out CitCon, or you're going to love CitCon. And a lot of people took that and they're like, oh my God, they're releasing the Pioneer. They are not releasing the Pioneer. Pioneer will be on the deliverables roadmap. It won't be hidden, and it'll take years to make, and it's years off. I think what they were talking about is they're going to talk about the new things Rastar can do that we will eventually get our hands on. And I think what that is going to be asteroid bases. Because one of the problems that CIG is going to be facing with players being able to build their own bases is the actual size. So I don't know how many of you have played Subnautica, but you can make some pretty extravagant bases. Some people will have a base with these tubes that goes from one side of the map to the other. The problem with Subnautica is it kind of has a built-in structure system that if you get too big, things will implode because the pressure on them is too much. So you have to build in airlocks and stuff like that, which basically serve as fizz blockers for the engine. But in-game, it kind of limits the size of your station to a certain extent. CIG is probably thinking about that because a player could go and build, or an org could build a giant station right on the exit or the entrance of a wormhole, a jump point, and you wouldn't be able to go in and out of that system just because there's this huge blocker in the way. Or you'd come out and you go right into the station, or they could just mount a whole bunch of guns facing it and you'd be toast. So they got to control the size of the stations and kind of the locations of the stations, I think, to a certain extent. I think they're going to get around that with asteroids, because if you think about it, if you have a big asteroid, right there you've got an asset that contains the station that would determine its size. So you would be saying no bigger than this. Will they allow us to build space stations the way that Subnautica allows us to build underwater stations? They might, and they might talk about that too. But I think that is kind of the next thing of Rastar that they're going to be talking about at CitCon, is kind of player-controlled bases, rolling it in with the engineering game loop and resource management, and the kinds of things we'll be able to put in our bases when we get them. Last couple of years, we've seen things like the little town on Pyro and the new underground, things like that. I think they'll start leaning towards eventually when you, the player, get Rastar, this is the kind of thing you'll be able to do. And I wouldn't be shocked if asteroid bases, which they haven't even mentioned yet, are one of those things. I'm going to leave Ruin Station up here because I like this one. Actually, this one just says, I'll move out of the way. It says, Pyro Station exterior. It doesn't say this is Ruin, but I think this actually is Ruin. I think I've seen this before, although I think Ruin had like more of an elongated shape. Not totally sure. We'll find out when we get Pyro one of these days. But anyway, the next thing that I think might be coming out, as far as like a quality of life thing, they talk about this a lot too, is I think they will finally talk about the UI improvements that I've been harping on for, I think the last 2 years, kind of MFDs, the visor HUD, Mobi-Glass, map AR system rework, and map marker system. All of those, I think they might finally talk about those UI improvements. They did talk about traversals a little bit. I want to say it was on an ISC or a CitCon, or not a CitCon, either an ISC or a Friday show right after CitCon. It would be cool if they showed us all the traversal things. So sliding, swimming, which again, swimming would dovetail nicely if they were going to show us the oceans or the new water effects, because those they've kind of been building on the sly and on the quiet. We know they've been building something like boats, things that actually go on the water, not like a space going boat, for Squadron 42. So they might show maybe one of those off. But the traversal options, I think that they could show swimming as part of that donut. But swimming, sliding, climbing, EVA, just kind of show us where they are on all of those, and the UI. Those two tech things. Remember, we've got 2 days, so they've got a lot of things they could show us. Gameplay is kind of the next segment that I think they'd have, and usually they kind of show off like an envision, or what they envision for one of the game loops that are coming. It's subtle. They usually work it into something else, but the ways they could do it with Pyro, I think we're getting bounty hunting, and they've been working on bounty hunting for a while now, so it should be kind of wrapping up. They could show us that. They could show us the next level of medical gameplay, which I think is coming, like cybernetics and all that. That would dovetail nicely with some of the artwork that they're working on. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that CIG has kind of been missing over the years, is this is the tech side and here's the art side, and just kind of flop between those two. That's something that they used to do a lot in the old Around the Verses that they've kind of gotten away from. I'm not totally sure why, because it's a great way to kind of explain this is the technical aspect and this is the aspect that you will see and interact with, and this is how it looks. And they just kind of take this holistic approach that makes it easier to follow, or easy to see how it will impact you. And there's the advantage to that is there's not as much conjecture on our part of, ooh, we're getting EVA. I have no idea what it is, but I'm sure it'll do this, 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 and this. And then you get it, and it just does one of those things. You're kind of like, this sucks. And it doesn't. It makes your life better. But in your brain, you were thinking it was going to do all of these things because CIG didn't give you all the information, or didn't put it together in a package that made it easier to follow, which is on CIG and their communication style, and partially on us for Hopium and Copium and all that. But bounty hunting, new medical gameplay, I could see cargo being something that they talk about. Freight elevators, especially, moving stuff, having to manually load and unload your ship, will be a huge, huge, huge impactor in this game. What will happen in 320 is your whole sea will come into an area, and then it'll magically spawn all the cargo. Eventually, you're going to either have to pay longshoremen from the station to load and unload the whole sea, or you're going to have a raft or something like that that's pulling those big containers off and moving them to the station, or moving them back, depending on how much time you have and how much support you have from other ships. I wouldn't be surprised if they talk about that next level. So it could be bounty hunting, it could be cargo moving, it could be medical. They're going to talk about some aspect of gameplay, would be my guess. And finally, I think maybe not on day one, I don't think they'd bury the lead that hard, but they might, is actually give us a release date for Squadron 42. Say Squadron 42 dropping Christmas or winter of 2024, which is what I'm expecting. That we get Starfield this year, winter of 2023. People play it for a few months, maybe up to a year. Most people will probably play it 3 to 6 months. That's about the average window for a game like that for the average player. There are definitely going to be diehard players that'll play that thing 20 years from now and be modding it and stuff like that. I could see CIG doing that, is let people have their year of Starfield and then let them have Squadron 42 after that. One thing I think would be really cool is if they released a demo of Squadron 42 during CitCon. Is have like a free. Most of these demos usually run like 30 to 90 minutes. Just have 30 to 90 minutes of the first chapter. Let's talk about ships. So there's a lot of rumors out there. So if you don't want spoilers or you don't like Star Citizen leaks, feel free to tune out now for probably the next, call it 2 minutes, because I'm going to talk about the ships that people have seen in the code and are pretty sure they're there. One that I think is almost certainly coming is the UTV. So this is the Jeep version of the STV. You can sort of see it's got room for gun. I think it's got room for like 1 SEU in the back here. In the flatbed, room for 2 seats. Hope you like Whiplash because there's no headrest. And then if we come down here, and so let's see, art ships. So they had a lot of little clues in this one. So I'm going to skip this one for right now, but let's go down here. 2 new variants went through LOD 0 phase, so the basic level of details thing. We happen to have a leak out there that makes this pretty confident. It's 2 variants of the cutter. It's a sort of scout version. Sort of think of if you mixed a cutter with a terrapin, you'd have that one. So the exploration version of the cutter. And I think the other one's a scout variant, which kind of seems like it's expedition to me. I kind of saw the pictures, but again, I don't really like spoilers for myself, even though I'm spoiling this for you. Congratulations. We know there's 2 variants of the cutter that are coming with some confidence that we're going to get those. We know the UTV is out there. We know the Tumbrel Stank is out there, the little tiny tonk that they're working on, the Storm. I think we're getting that one. Wouldn't be shocked if that is 320, 320.x. We know the Crusader A1 Spirit is out there. I've said for a while that the C1 will probably drop at the same time as the A1. The only thing that I could see that would prevent the C1 from dropping at the same time is if they don't have tractor beams working yet, in which case they will release in 320.1. We don't know when 320 is going to drop. I am guessing it is going to drop in September. So prior to IAE and prior to CitCon is we'll kind of get the Stank and the Spirit. I think we'll get 320.1 with the C1 Spirit. And if we do get the C1 Spirit with the tractor beam, it almost certainly means they'll be dropping the SRV, the tugboat. So we know that there's like 5 vehicles right there. So let's go ahead and look through here. So right here they say work on a new ship variant continued with the dashboard and cockpit receiving attention. So that is interesting because that sounds like a single player or a single seat fighter without an interior or something that's single seater. That doesn't sound like an interior. So some small ship variant. Oh, okay. Well, that one is the Fury LX. That's the racer version is right there, which we also know is coming pretty soon, which we have seen in June's Jump Point, the Fury LX. So we know that one's out there. So that covers what this one is. So work on a new ship variant, dashboard, attention. That's the Fury LX. 2 new variants are the 2 variants of the cutter. So these are small ships, which I'm actually good if they start releasing small ships because the turnaround time on those is faster. So they're not selling you a dream. They're not selling you a ship that, hey, 6 years from now, you'll be able to fly this thing. Or someone like me that bought the BMM on concept, hey, here's something that 15 years from now, you might actually be able to fly around. I mean, I was in my 30s when I bought the BMM. I am almost 50 now. Anyway, and that is scary to say. Elsewhere, tasks were started for an all-new vehicle, so not a variant. The team began breaking apart the concept and putting it together with an in-game preview while planning out the work required for the base and its variants. So the plan is to white box all the variants at the same time and select which versions will move into gray box first. Hopefully this is kind of an Aegis. I think it's Aegis or Anvil. Hang on. So if you look at this right here, That isn't something we have in the game yet, but it's something that we kind of need, like a truck that has like a tanker, cargo, all that kind of stuff. We don't have that in the game yet for whatever reason. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's something like that. Would be cool. Moving on, things that aren't on here, and I'll get up here for probably 6 or 7 years. Every Christmas, I was saying CIG is going to drop the Titan suit on us, and every year they would not do it, and I was like, damn it! But because it's the last thing on my must-buy list, I want at least 2 Titan suits on board my BMM to kind of work as security. Long story. So I've had the concept of the BMM for a long time. I've done a lot of thinking on it. Anyway, Titan suit. There are rumors that the Titan suit is actually out there, and it might be we could maybe get our hands on it sooner than later. That's just a rumor. I'm not seeing anything on here that actually indicates the Titan suit is in the list of ships. But in theory, they've been working on the Titan suit for years, so it's quite possible the Titan's been done for Squadron 42, at least mostly done, and it would just kind of take a polish pass to get ready for the PU. Who knows? It would make ground battles way more interesting. That one's out there. As yet unannounced ship is passing its LOD 0 pass. So let's take a look at the roadmap. Oh, and the X1. We know the X1 is out there, unless I mentioned that already. Announced vehicle, 12 weeks. This one's been done for years. Vehicle concept art. I am guessing this 12 weeks is typically a medium or complicated ship. A couple of these have got to be the boats because they've done water vehicles in the past as one of their deliverables on here, so we know they've worked on them, which means they have to have concepted some of the vehicles. So we know there's this one that's been done for ages that's 12 weeks. If it is water related, we wouldn't see it until they're pretty sure water moving around is actually in the game. We've got this one, which was just the narrative team of 2 weeks. Narrative is just the write-up that the lore team does to sort of say, this is what we envision. We need a ship that does this. We need a vehicle that does this. So I don't think this is it. The concept art team hasn't done it. They're not going to release something to us at CitCon or IAE that doesn't even have artwork attached to us. They're not just going to give us a write-up and be like, imagine what it would look like. No, they're going to give us pretty pictures because that's what we buy. 15 weeks for an unannounced vehicle. Again, vehicle concept. They're talking about LOD 0, so it's not a vehicle concept, it's an actual vehicle. And this is where we start getting into the interesting ones. So we've got 34 weeks for an unannounced vehicle. We got 11 weeks down here. So I said for a while that 11 weeks was probably a skateboard. What this actually is probably the Fury LX. So this is the racing version because it's actually simpler than the other ones. It's probably just going to be the Fury with slightly bigger engines and no guns. So easier to make because you don't have to have the attachment points for guns. So we got that one sorted. This one actually has VFX on it. It's 27 weeks. I wouldn't be shocked if either one of these it would make sense that you give the Montreal team a variant to work on because the pipeline would be smoother. They'd be working with an existing ship to work from, an existing hull, and they could build it out from there. That would make a lot of sense to me. So I wouldn't be surprised if Montreal was working on the 2 variants of the cutter, which is leaving us with this guy, and this guy. This 8-week... this one is 8 weeks, Montreal Vehicle Content Team. This one is coming up at the end of the year, so pretty safe bet that one's not going to be CitCon or IAE. So we're left with these 2. So one of these is probably the STV or the UTV, which I'm thinking this probably is. just because it would be a simpler vehicle. This one already has VFX. And so now we're kind of in a neat spot of what the hell is it? One of these is probably the unannounced ground vehicle. So popping back to the monthly report, you could say tasks are started for an all-new vehicle. Now, usually you can see when they're talking about spaceships, they specifically mention ship. So yeah, here they don't mention ship, but they have in the past. Vehicle usually means something on the ground. Ship means something that flies. So we know those are out there. They do have the Spirit on there, but we've got at least 4 ships. I'm assuming what they are doing is kind of meshing them together. So they're talking about the Spirit. When they mention the Spirit, they're talking about the C1, the A1, and the E1. With these variants, they're probably doing the same thing. They're not breaking them up. So 2 new variants. That's your cutter. All new vehicle is, I'm going to guess, the Aegis cargo and gas mover, and maybe a troop mover in that format. The Tumbrel Stank, I'm pretty sure is coming. Work with a new ship variant is interesting. In the comments, let me know what variant you think that is, because these are the cutters that we know is coming. I think that is probably the Fury LX. An unannounced ship passes its LODs. This is actually the one, okay, disregard what I said. This is the one that I want to hear your theory on, because this one, I'm pretty sure that's the LX. These are the cutter. I don't know what this is. Sulian maybe, or something else. I would think that if they were going to do the Sulian... Oh, one last thing. I totally forgot about this. The Polaris. They're definitely going to do a thing that, like what they did with the Band of Merchantman before they put a pin in it, where they had a talk about all the ships, and then they sort of said, well, let's talk about the Band of Merchantman, and then they showed us the walkthrough of the Band of Merchantman before they said, let's rip out Don Steeler's heart and put a pin in it. And then they did that. They aren't going to do that with the Polaris. Polaris is an easier ship to get out the door. Still will take them a long time because it's huge, but I think we'll kind of get a walkthrough of the redesign of the Polaris too. And gang, that is it. So thanks for sticking through this. Again, let me know if you noticed anything weird with the audio. I kind of had to make some concessions with this new setup. I don't have quite as many USB hubs, or quite as many USB ports, so I had to make do with a couple hubs, which might be cutting down the quality, so I'm kind of trying to play with that to get it to work. So yeah, let me know what you think of this, and catch me next time.